Judge Iman, paranoid amid Tehran's arrest, loses his gun. Suspecting family, he imposes harsh rules, straining relationships as society destabilizes. The Seed of the Sacred Fig is directed by Mohammad Rasulov and stars Shohila Golestani, Misag Zareth, Masha Rostami, and Satara Maleki. So Jeffrey, what did you think about The Seed of the Sacred Fig?
So Seed of the Sacred Fig is by Muhammad Rasulov, who made another film I've seen called There Is No Evil. It's a film that is very similar to this one that investigates the role of single families on the greater scale of the theocratic government within Iran. The film tells 4 separate stories, and they all intersect around the death penalty in some fashion. And it had a way of interweaving the personal and the political and showing the private and completely understandable plight of individuals in the film who in their personal lives are just seeking what we all are, a decent job that helps us get by, freedom and comfort for our family members. It bridged the gap between a totalitarian system and the individuals who carry out orders. And I think that film did a really remarkable job of blaming the institution and showing its pressures on the individual while simultaneously acknowledging that the system of individuals enable the theocracy. Its philosophy and its empathy is very dense in that way, and the film is better for it. I imagine you're wondering why I'm talking so much about that film, and it's because I think he's able to replicate all of those things in Seed of the Sacred Fig. And frankly, I think to much more profound and unnerving effect than that film. Seed of the Sacred Fig is absolutely masterful in making a family drama that echoes real life events taking place in Iran as women seek freedom from control. He could have made a very overtly political film or a complex psychological chamber drama about a family's generational divisions. And since he couldn't choose which one to make, he decided to make both of them. That's the miracle and the magic trick here is the internal and external conflicts become so intermingled as the film progresses that they're virtually indistinguishable from one another. That's a very hard thing to do and very, very impressive, I think, on a script writing level. The film begins as this tense family drama and it gradually becomes more suspenseful and very propulsive, actually, especially at a nearly 3-hour runtime. We saw this late at night in New York City at the New York Film Festival, and I had no trouble at all staying awake. This is a 3-hour film. I think it started at like 8:45 at night, and that is like way past my bedtime. That's like 15 minutes from my bedtime. Anyway, how unnerving and how suspenseful it was really a testament because we saw it so late. Ultimately, I thought this was just so profoundly intense and such an intricate drama that intelligently interrogates these two sides of modern Iran in ways we don't see in everyday life, all while mastering and establishing the fundamentals of film and writing, like deeply drawn characters, an ever-changing and unpredictable story, and a very powerful message. This is a very, very strong entry, I think, in Iran's filmmaking history, which is already pretty dense and storied, and certainly one of the best international films I've seen this year.
I could not agree more. I think, as you were saying, the dialogue really speaks to the film's ability to maintain your attention mostly the entire runtime of 3 hours because so much of this film takes place in such few places. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Most of it takes place in this apartment that the family lives in. But this film at its center is really the story about this one family's slow descent into division and chaos. And this division is really multifaceted, as you were saying, within our reflections on politics, religion, power dynamics, gender, and so much more. But what makes the film so brilliant in my mind is the weaving of all these issues into a scathing modern portrait of oppression and its effects on the relationship within a family. For as good as the film is in dissecting Iran's own political and cultural landscapes, I found it to be quite relatable to our global and local landscapes in so many ways. And I don't say that to impart my American self into this story. Obviously, it's a very specific story, but there's themes in here which I think we're seeing all over the world politically happening right now, even if they're not quite the same in every single country.
Yeah, and actually, we saw this before the election. I'd be curious to watch it again now that I know the election results. It probably would rock me a bit harder, but it's very easy to see yourself in this family when you're talking with your parents and you have this generational divide about trans people or whatever variety of issues that you have, you know? So it's certainly relatable.
Yeah, so whether that was the intention or just a coincidental reality, I'm not too entirely sure. But regardless of that, it makes the film really transcendent in so many unexpected ways. Now, I do want to backtrack slightly to the story because the film starts with this explanation of the seed fig and describes how it's an invasive plant that spreads its seeds by wrapping around other trees and strangling them. And this is quite the alarming tone to begin the film with because we are pushed from that moment into the everyday life of this family. And for all intents and purposes, it seems pretty normal. The husband and wife seem to have a deep and personal relationship. The family seems strong as a unit, with depictions of family dinners and friendly banter among all the family members. But as this film progresses, as you were saying, these political and moral conundrums arise that begin affecting these ties. For example, women on the streets are starting to protest the forcible wearing of the hijab. The father, Iman, receives a promotion at work where he is all of a sudden being asked to act in ways that he knows are wrong and immoral. As these events start taking shape, each member of the family starts to gravitate to the side of each of these issues, and thus these familial ties start to strain until they eventually snap.
Yeah.
I don't want to say more than that.
Right after the explanation of the seed of the sacred fig, the next image we see, the first image of the film, is bullets falling on a table. And it's actually in the trailer. Between that and then you see the bullets, you know this isn't going to go well. But anyway, the film does have this tremendous sense of tension and foreboding that I'm amazed that it's able to keep up for a 3-hour runtime, but it starts in that place and only gets more progressively ugly from there. We have a litany of terrific actors here, and I think it may be beneficial to talk about them like in terms of characters. So Helia Golestani plays Najmeh.
Yes, and we're apologizing in advance if we mispronounce anybody's name.
Yeah, so this is the mother of the family. For me personally, this was the best performance in the film, or like,
I agree.
Well, one of the most nuanced, and it's a tight race. Like they're all very, very good. But her character is forced to walk this line between obeying her very clearly obstinate husband's ambitions and concerns and translating her daughter's political defiance, which I think is really interesting. The thing I really love about her performance is she's constantly arguing with her daughters and coming from a more traditional lens, but then you see them slowly start to affect her and the way that she talks to her husband. And suddenly she starts very quietly questioning the ways that he's doing things and saying, you know, maybe this more traditional life that we've chosen for ourselves, these more traditional views, aren't the best way. So I really like that. I like the duality of that. I thought that was really intelligently done.
That's exactly what I wrote. So I have nothing to add. But I agree. She's struggling with her conformity to the state and tradition and conservatism. And her daughters are really pushing her to think through this progressive lens. Exactly like you said. I think that nuance and that confliction happening within inside her is really what makes her character so great.
Iman is another one who's very interesting, the husband, because at the beginning of the film, he's plagued with guilt. Initially, we see him as like this very complex character, someone who cares for justice, but he wants to explore the nuances of the case before ruling on it. Like he's really against the bureaucracy of just giving a ruling and throwing it away. Like he really wants to make sure that he's fair. Yet the mounting pressure of all the arrests from these protests have forced him to make concessions that he's uncomfortable with. He's the most traditional of the bunch, certainly. The daughters admirably challenge their parents on all these views, everything from the falsities of the state-run media in Iran to the freedom to wear headdresses or not, or the freedom to protest against the government. So they like continually unearth these contradictory philosophies within their parents' own traditional views. It's ultimately, I think, where the great humanity and great drama of the film lies.
As you were discussing the daughters, what opens up this new perspective to them, I think, is this friend who's very involved in these protests. After she gets caught in one of these protests, she gets injured. So it's through this experience with this other person that I think the daughters become more understanding of the humanity behind these choices and what they're fighting for.
So back to Iman, who is the character who probably goes through the biggest change, I would say, or becomes more cemented in his views. He begins as that complicated but sympathetic figure that I was just talking about, but gradually he becomes more controlling, more violent, more overbearing as the film moves from like this kitchen-sink realism to something more exaggerated but not completely unbelievable in my mind. During this transformation is when the film goes, I think, from a realistic plotting device to a more metaphorical parable, in my opinion. And it seems like from what I've heard and the reviews I've read that the final stretch of this film is where people are bumping on it a little bit. And I have to say it actually worked for me. I thought it did this really elegant transition from kind of like Mike Leigh style like film about a family who has all of these issues going on to a more propulsive drama, but a drama that has very clear archetypes and very clear allegories that I think worked really well. To me, that was very clear in the storytelling, but I understand how it's maybe a bit jarring for some viewers.
I don't know. Speaking from personal experience here, and I think you could as well, we know people and our family members, typically white men, I've seen their rhetoric changing as time progresses from somebody very different than the person I knew just 10 years ago or 10 years ago.
We also have seen these people become a little violent and very angry when challenged.
Yeah.
The way that Iman acts towards the end of this film to me actually made sense because I kind of know people like that, which is unfortunate. It wasn't unrealistic to me at all. Let's put it that way. The final shot of the film in particular like has this ability to really transcend reality into like more of like the last line of a parable or almost like a Greek myth. I just wanted to kind of at least mention how Iman changes throughout the film because it seems like that's what people are bumping on.
I will talk about that more in detail, but I think it's a bit spoilery, so I'm going to save that for a little bit down the line.
Okay.
I want to talk a little bit about the political landscape in Iran because I think that's very interesting conversation when it comes to the making of this film. So Iran's government is a theocracy. It's basically run by religious extremism. The government in this case is not cool with people who disagree with the government. There are people who are making films that are critical of it. They get put in jail. They have to flee the country. Many filmmakers have to actually make their films in secret. The director was actually at the New York Film Festival. He participated in a Q&A afterwards. I found this extremely interesting of a conversation because he talks about how he would have to direct from different buildings entirely. Like he wasn't even near the set. So that way authorities wouldn't know that he was actually making this film. The secrecy also creates these other challenges such as filming outside, the inability to build sets. And I think the production really handles these challenges with a lot of skill in a way that I actually think adds a lot to the film. The small scale makes the story feel so personal and grounded. Oftentimes we see characters looking out their windows of this little apartment that most of the film takes place in, and they're listening to the protest happening on the streets below. While they are separated from these mass demonstrations, they are so deeply intertwined with them on such a personal level of what's happening in their home.
Yeah, we should mention too that the film uses real life protest footage that's intermingled with the actual fictionalized film that you're seeing. Obviously, this film was not funded through Iran. It had to be funded from outside sources. So this is actually Germany's submission for foreign language film because they helped fund this film, even though it's a film that takes place and was filmed in Iran, which is really interesting. He also mentioned during the Q&A how because the protests were going on, it actually gave them a little more freedom in the streets because the police were so busy with all these things going on with the protests. It was pretty easy for them to blend in filming some things on the street, which I thought that was pretty interesting as well.
Going from here, I'd love to get into more specifics about the end of the film. So if you have not seen The Seed of the Sacred Fig, I highly recommend watching it, then come back to this review afterwards because we are going to get into a lot of spoilers about the ending. So as we were discussing Iman's character earlier, I want to get deeper into him because what basically happens through this process of the film is that he actually lets this fear guide him to becoming the role of the oppressor. That is apparent in him losing this gun. We find out one of the daughters has actually taken it, but he is bringing them to places to be interrogated.
And they're blindfolded, and it looks very traumatizing.
So in Iman's transformation into an oppressor of his own family members, they end up escaping the city. It looks like a family vacation home, maybe in the mountains or a little village. And it's here that he's trying to record the daughters admitting that they stole the gun. So that way the blame isn't put on him. He basically wants to throw them under the bus. And so once they disobey him, he ends up putting them in jail cells in the basement of this property. It's an escalation, I think, in which breaks the mother.
Yeah.
I think it's at this point when it's finally affected her that she sees that all understanding and empathy from the father is pretty much gone.
Yeah. Whoever he was transitioning into, he is now fully that monster.
So one of the daughters makes this crazy escape from the jail cells. They end up having this dramatic chase through a crumbling set of buildings where the father ends up dying by falling through this collapsed portion of the building. Metaphorically speaking, I absolutely love how the family's living conditions deteriorate as their family bonds do. From this well-furnished apartment in the city to this dilapidating getaway home in a rural village to the chase through these crumbling buildings, we really see the physical foundation that this family stands on disappearing right before our eyes.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that, actually. And like the way that your family unit disintegrating can also be parallel to your economic state disintegrating is really interesting.
Yeah.
I think that this whole, like the maze that they're running through at the end of the film could be interpreted in a variety of ways. The way that I saw it was almost like they were traversing through Iran's history. You have the more modern section where they're living in the apartments, well furnished, it's nicer, etc. Until we go back to these abandoned buildings, these clay buildings that are not fundamentally very well built and very old. So it's almost like they're going through the history of a variety of theocracies and oppressive regimes within Iran.
If I'm aware correctly, I'm pretty sure Iran wasn't always this way. I don't think women were always forced to wear hijabs. I think there was a period of time in which the country was a lot more progressive.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I think it has gone backwards. Is from my understanding, if I'm correct. Somebody could recorrect me if I'm wrong on that. I'm just speaking from the top of my head and what I might know. Oh, there was something I was going to say. Oh yes, the dad falling. This metaphor, I think, for the world crumbling beneath him. I loved that moment.
Yeah.
I think it's symbolic of his ideals and everything he's advocating for. Historical weight does not support his beliefs, I think. And history has shown time and time again, you oppress people, they will rise up against oppression. Your ideals will just not stand. They don't hold any weight. And I think symbolically that floor collapsing beneath him or ceiling, whatever it is he's standing on, I think metaphorically is just very apt for this moment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I really like that interpretation.
So are you ready to go to grades?
I am. I'm going to give this film an A-. The fundamentals of filmmaking, like the ideas of interweaving these thematic threads and these really hefty threads about oppressive regimes and making that personal and interesting within a family drama. Again, I know that some people bump on this, but I love its elegant transition from family drama into metaphorical, almost like a Greek myth, like
Yes.
something that's mythological or allegorical in some way. I thought that that was really intelligently and elegantly done. I understand not everybody thinks that way, but I really liked it and it jumped out to me immediately. And I think that this film is just a thrilling watch. Like, it is a movie that I was very distinctly on the edge of my seat for the entire time. So I thought it was tremendous.
I completely agree. I give the film an A. I thought it was an absolute masterclass of filmmaking. Everything that you were talking about, I really love how it shows the slow descent of this family. As you were saying, I don't know why people are talking about the drowniness. If somebody's on that page, I would really love to hear more about that. Because to me, we live in a privileged position right now where I think we believe that it can't get worse. History has shown us time and time again, it can get worse. These things do descend into violence. We've seen in Germany, we've seen in Iran.
Variety of places in South America.
Nowhere is safe. To think you are safe, I think, is a very privileged perspective to have. If you think that choice that they make in the film is too harsh or too quick, I don't know, because I see it in people around me. I don't know how else to better say it than that.
No, you're right. You're right.
All right, and that's it for our review of The Seed of the Sacred Fig. The Seed of the Sacred Fig is coming out on November 27th. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out. Let us know in the comments, what did you think about this film? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.